Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our organization here at Local First Arizona is proud to partner with the staff from the city of Phoenix who are going to be sharing information on small business emergency preparedness through their workshop today. A lot of really great information that they're going to provide you with today. So really encourage note taking and jotting down of any questions you might have throughout the workshop today. They're going to go over a variety of information regarding what you can do as a business to make sure that you're prepared for anything that's going to be an emergency in the future. I think we all know, given the pandemic and things kind of hitting out of nowhere, you should always be prepared for an emergency or a crisis as a business. So this is going to be really helpful information to help you look forward to the future to do that. And so we have several guests from the city today that are going to be presenting, but I'd like to give it over to Kim Gathers, who's going to lead everything today. Kim, thank you so much for being here, and I'll give it over to you.
Thank you, Thomas, and welcome everyone to our Small Business Emergency Preparedness Workshop. And we want to first thank Local First Arizona for providing us this opportunity to conduct this workshop for the small business community. And so now let's get into how we are going to spend the next hour. So again, for today, we have 3 objectives that we want to accomplish. The objectives are tied to the modules. So you should have received a situation manual, and that manual lists all the modules that we'll be going through. The first objective and module is threats and hazards, how you determine threats and hazards, what are threats and hazards. Then we'll go into identifying risks. So how do you identify risk to your business or to your family? And then finally, module 3 and our third objective is to help you get started with developing a plan. How do you tie this all together? And so just as Thomas said, we encourage you, this is an interactive workshop. And so we encourage you to ask questions. You can put questions in the Q&A as we're going along if you feel better doing that. We also will have about 10 minutes at the end to do questions and answers on any follow-up that you may have as you're going through. But again, this is interactive, and what we hope is that you will leave here with something that you didn't know, or maybe an answer to a question that you had, and then also just tools and resources to help you better prepare your business in the event of an emergency and disaster. So with me, I have, as part of our team, we are, the City of Phoenix, Office of Emergency Management. And my co-presenter today is our director, Brent Olson. And then we also have Jackie Jacquez from our office, and she'll be helping us capture some of the things that are going on, questions and answers. She'll be helping us with that. And so, again, interactive, please feel free to engage in the Q&A. And now we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Brent Olson, who is going to conduct modules 1 and 2. Brent?
Thank you, Kim. I'd also like to thank Local First Arizona for hosting this workshop and giving us the chance to talk with you a little bit about preparedness. Thank you all for taking the time away from your busy schedules to attend this webinar, and hopefully you'll pick up something that will help in your business to be a little bit better prepared in case the worst happens. As Kim said, my name is Brent Olson, and I am the Emergency Management Director for the City of Phoenix. The main focus of our office is to conduct preparedness planning and coordinate response activities during an emergency. One of our primary goals is making sure the city is prepared during an emergency or disaster. Part of that preparedness has to include making sure our citizens and businesses are prepared as well. Every discussion I've ever had about preparedness always starts by finding out about the threats and hazards that might impact property or people. and which helps us focus on what we need to do to become better prepared as a city. One of the best ways to do this is to use a situation or scenario to help identify the threats and hazards that may exist. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have a scenario for you to look at. It's 7 p.m. on Thursday night, and you receive an alert on your phone of a severe thunderstorm warning moving across the metropolitan area. That's never happened to you, I'm sure, not in Arizona where we don't have any storms, right? Maybe during monsoon season. We've had a pretty active monsoon season this year. So let's talk about this scenario a little bit, because you're probably familiar with it. I think we can agree that this kind of storm comes with hazards, right? But let's start with talking about what a hazard is. The definition for a hazard, next slide, please, is a hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm to people, property, or environment. Some of the everyday hazards that we all experience every day are, stairs and the potential for falling down them or injuring ourselves while walking up them, eating, and some of the risks associated with that, risks of taking medications, heat exposure, poor lighting, bathrooms. Natural hazards could include hurricanes and tornadoes. Monsoon season certainly comes into that with our severe thunderstorm season. But it's typically a naturally or inadvertently occurring event. It's not planned, it's not intent, there's no intent to harm. It just occurs naturally, and we haven't learned to control the weather yet. Hopefully, we never get to that point when we are able to control everything. But there is no human intent behind the event. So back to our storm. I know you've all experienced our monsoon season storms. If you haven't, welcome to Phoenix, because I assume you're very new here. What hazards does this type of storm bring with it? Well, the most common hazard worldwide and causing billions of dollars every year is flooding. And yes, we do have flooding in Arizona from time to time. Water doesn't tend to soak into our soil very quickly, so we wind up with flooding very easily and very quickly. But what are the other hazards that come along with it? Well, next slide, please. We certainly have extreme heat, particularly during the summer. In fact, whoops, where'd we go? There we go. We certainly have extreme heat. We experience that every year. In fact, so much so that the city of Phoenix has developed a new office that they just put in place to deal with extreme heat and help mitigate it for our residents. But we have other hazards. Mentioned flooding already, but we also have wildland fires. Many times human cause, of course, but we also have them as a natural hazard when we have lightning storms. We have drought. We're still in a mild drought right now, but thanks to all the rain we had during monsoon season this year, it's lightened some. Hopefully it continues to lighten. Dust storms cause problems for us every year. Years ago, when I was a firefighter, I worked out toward I-10, and we had accidents every year during monsoon season because of dust storms. And then, of course, you're familiar with epidemics and pandemics because we've been in one for the last couple of years, and you probably don't need to hear any more than that. There are also man-made hazards that are not natural, but they're not intent. There's no intent to it. They're inadvertently occurring events like chemical spills or power outages, active shooter situations, terrorist events, fires, cyber attacks. Cyber attacks are on the rise. I don't know if any of you have experienced a cyber attack, but if you haven't, you're very lucky. Next slide, please. Okay, so I mentioned threats and hazards. We differentiate between the two, but the biggest difference between a threat and a hazard is with a threat, there is an intent to harm somebody. So it's not a naturally occurring event. We don't have control over it most of the time, but it is an intent to harm somebody. But you can take steps for both threats and hazards to make them less impactful. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But what threats do your business experience? Have you experienced any threats? Some of the threats that I can think of right off the top of my head are the threat of burglary or the threat of a robbery, or shoplifting, or an angry customer who becomes violent. Those are all threats. So there's a very big difference, and that's the human potential that's involved. So when we start talking about the threats and hazards, identifying as many as we can help you become more prepared. You may not identify them all, you may never experience some of them, but if you do take the steps to prepare, you're going to be further along than if you don't. I kind of use the analogy of that schoolyard bully when I was a kid. If I was prepared for him and stood up to him, he wasn't such a big threat. It's the same thing with any other threat or hazard. If you're prepared for it, it's not such a big deal. So let me go back a little bit and let me ask you a question. And I realize you can't answer, so I'll answer for you. But if I say tornadoes are a hazard in the city of Phoenix, what would you say? Many of us have never seen a tornado in the city of Phoenix. But in fact, tornadoes do occur here. In November 2019, in fact, the day after Thanksgiving, there were 3 tornadoes that touched down in the Phoenix area. Doing damage to houses and infrastructure, they created some problems. So we know it's a hazard. Now we're going to talk about the risk associated with all of this, okay? Determining risk means determining the potential for something to actually impact. While we have had tornadoes in Phoenix, and we will probably have tornadoes again, tornadoes are uncommon in the Phoenix area. They don't normally happen very often, and they don't normally cause serious damage. So in a quick assessment, when we're talking about risk, how much of a potential could this happen, we would probably say it's low. However, we know it did occur. We know it occurred in 2019. So there is a risk. It's not a zero-sum risk, but there is a risk. So we would consider it low, but it's still on our radar. It's certainly on mine as the emergency manager for the city. So assessing and knowing your risk and what you can do to prevent or mitigate them, that being reduce the impact of the risk, is what we're looking at and what we start planning for. So some of the things you can do to reduce the risk of damage and injury during monsoon season is, watch the weather, pay attention to the weather. We've got some great news stations in the Phoenix area, in addition to the radio. And one of them that comes to mind is KFY, or 2 of them that come to mind are KFYI and KTAR, who provide weather reports on a regular basis. So staying up on the weather, but also paying attention to the National Weather Service. The National Weather Service has a site where they keep it updated very regularly. In fact, they'll update it multiple times during monsoon season, where you can get up-to-date weather on it, but staying alert to the weather. Monsoon season comes with, one of the risks of monsoon season is high winds. We mentioned the scenario, 80-mile-an-hour winds. That actually happens here. Usually it's associated with something like a microburst that actually causes very high-level straight-line winds. Trimming trees or thinning them ahead of storms can make them less susceptible to damage, because downed trees damage housing, injure people, block roads, do all of those things that create problems for us. So thinning them out ahead of time is a mitigation action. Securing movable objects like planters, chairs, tables, equipment, things that can become projectiles in a serious windstorm are other ways that you can mitigate the risk of high winds. Flooding, as I said, was the #1 hazard in the world, causing billions of dollars of damage every year to flooding. Can be mitigated to a certain degree. If you know that your property, your house, your business, anything that you value is prone to flooding, you can take steps ahead of time. One of the things we recommend is being aware of weather, like I said, but also having sandbags or reusable flood barriers available to put in front of doors to prevent flooding from happening. That is a mitigation measure. Also staying alert to flooded roadways. You've heard this hopefully a ton of times, but turn around, don't drown. You don't know how deep the water is if it's running across the road. You don't know what the flow is, and it doesn't take much water to start moving a car around. I know you've seen the news reports and you've seen the rescues that our fire department and the fire departments around the valley have done. You don't want to become a victim of that. So turn around, don't drown is one mitigation measure. And then stay alert to to what's going on around you. Heavy rains are one of the big issues we have here because we're not used to it. This last summer during monsoon season, we had 2 large commercial structures that had water collect so much on the roof that the roofs collapsed. And the thought cause of it, the probable cause of it was clogged drains, clogged scuppers from the drain, not allowing the water to drain off the roof, collecting enough to the point where the roofs caved in. That's preventable. Check your rain gutters, check your drains, make sure that there isn't an opportunity for water to collect on the roof. Because even if the roof doesn't cave in, the chances of more and more water collecting on the roof is going to create leaks. It's going to break through sooner or later. There's nothing more powerful than the power of water. So just some things to think about. Remember, look for your hazards. Determine what hazards impact you. Be aware of them. What threats impact you, be aware of them, and start putting together a plan for how you're going to minimize that. And right now, I'm going to turn it over or turn it back to Kim to talk to you about how to plan for these things. But if you have any questions of me, you can put them in the chat. We'll be answering those as we get toward the end of the session, and we'll make sure all your questions get answered. And again, thank you for having us and taking the time away from your day to be with us to talk about this. Kim, all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. So I want to do kind of a checkpoint. I see that if you are able to, the chat feature on your screen, as a business owner myself, a small business owner, I understand the importance of protecting your business. And so you heard Brent talk about threats and hazards. And so I'm just interested after hearing that and kind of seeing what the difference is, if you could put in the chat for me so that we know what, some of the small businesses that we have represented, what are some of the hazards to your business? What do you see based on what you've heard from Brent? What do you think are some of the hazards? And so as you're thinking about that, and kind of putting it all together, because I do know that some of this information, it's a lot, and it could be initially overwhelming. Being in a pandemic for almost 2 years, as a small business owner, I'm sure that you probably had some hands-on experience, and so one of the hazards that we see more often and has it more often than not are power outages. And so that could possibly, we see them more often now. Want to make sure. Yes, so thank you, Elisa. And Brent touched on this, but alerting those who are unfamiliar with the AZ weather of flooding and fires. That is important because sometimes power outages come as a result of actually those two things that can happen. Okay. So Brent talked about the risks. Okay. So one of the things we want to do, as Brent covered modules 1 and 2, now that you have had an opportunity and maybe not had an opportunity, and one of the things we don't want you, the goal is not to for you to feel overwhelmed. Our office will be here to assist you after. Our information is in the situation manual, and that's what we are here to assist. So we don't want you to feel overwhelmed. And so as you kind of heard, okay, what the difference is between a threat and a hazard, and how do I identify some risks that may, to my business. Also, I want to stress that not only look at this for your business, because that definitely is important, and that's why we're doing this workshop, but also the risk to your family, your personal residents. Because what we know as emergency managers is if your family and your home is prepared, then you will be better prepared in responding at your place of business or where you work, because not being prepared creates stress. And so if that stress and you feel that you're unprepared, in your communities or in your families, then that is going to also carry over. So I want you to kind of think about emergency preparedness around you in all that you do. So your community, your home, and your business. And just kind of, as you think, kind of, and digest that. So now that how do we put all this together? And so this workshop is for us to cover some of the critical pieces. But there is, when we talk about developing a plan, there are several components to a plan. And we want to just go over a few things that you should cover in a plan just to get you started. And your plan is going to always be a living document. Okay. And so you will always probably think of something that you need to add to the plan, or changes you may need to make to your plan, or even from hands-on experience, like now in a pandemic. Oh, I didn't have that in the plan, and this is what we've experienced in our business, so I might want to add that. And so that's okay. And so if you're also following along with your situation manual, on page 10 is module 3, where we'll talk about developing a plan. So take into consideration the scenarios that you heard from modules 1 and 2, okay? And assume, right? And this is, again, this could happen, right? So you put it in here because it could happen. So assume you as the business owner you're out of town, and a severe weather notification comes in. You may get it on your phone, you have an alert that you may get on your phone. You watch the storm blow through from your television in sunny Hawaii. Okay. And so as we start to talk about developing a plan, the first thing I want you to think about, and you can put it in the Q&A as well, who's in charge? You're in Hawaii, who's in charge? Who has the authority to make decisions on your behalf for your business? Sometimes as small business owners, we don't have the luxury, right, to have someone that we left to make decisions on our behalf. Okay. But as you develop your plan, those are some of the things that you want to think about. So the first component of emergency preparedness plan that I'm going to cover with you today is the communication plan. And the communications plan is, just as we started off with the scenario, who's in charge, who has authority to make decisions on your behalf. This communication plan is going to help those individuals that you left in charge. It is a tool, a resource for them and for you as you sit to develop your plan. It is a list of contact information. Do you have the names and telephone numbers of any employees, all of your employees? And if there are employees that are not on site, that they're able to contact them. Okay. Do you have emergency contact numbers for the employees? And as you develop your communications plan, think about where your business is located and what surrounds your business, the community in which your business is in, your customer base. Okay, those, do you have a list of your customers who depend on your business? And if something was to happen, how would those customers be notified? Are there key members in your community that you partner with, whether it's organizations or community leaders that you partner with? Do you have that information? And then when we talk about local government, and a lot of times we don't always get this information out to our small businesses. And this is why we're here. But local government, do you know that you have an emergency manager? City of Phoenix is fortunate that we have an emergency manager, and that is Brent Olson, who is a resource to you. And so in the event of a disaster or emergency, you can call our office. Okay. And so that information is something, that contact information is also something that you want to have in your plan as well. And again, your communications plan, your whole plan is a living document. So as you expand, or as you hire more people, or as people leave your business, these are all changes that is the reason why your plan is a living document. And so based on some of these things, and you know your business because you're the only one that knows your business, which is why it's important for you to be able to develop your own plan, because no one else knows your business like you. And so we talked about some of the contacts. Are there any other important contacts that are specific to your business? And you can put it in the Q&A. That may be specific to the type of business that you do that should be on your communications plan. So I'll give you a second to see if we have responses. And also one of the things we would like to see is, and this is not, and if you don't have a plan, this is not something that you should be feel bad about or be ashamed of, because small business owners, we tend to have to do everything. And so we can't always focus on all the items. And so do some of you already have a plan? Do you have a plan? If you have a plan, are your employees aware of the plan? Because that's also an important piece of this as you as you start to develop your plan, and you start to update your plan where you're adding and removing things. It's important that your employees know that you do have an emergency preparedness plan and they know what's in the plan, because it also helps them to be better prepared as well. So the second component of the plan is an emergency kit. And you've probably heard about emergency kits, and you may have questions. I know that initially I had several questions about an emergency kit. Is an emergency kit a first aid kit? Well, an emergency kit is it's more comprehensive than just your basic first aid kit. And the importance and the reason to have an emergency kit speaks to, again, about the preparedness aspect of it, and having the the supplies and the things in the event of an emergency allows us to be more resilient, allows us to make it through, right? That particular emergency or disaster. And so if you have an emergency kit, you may already have an emergency kit. So this list that you see on the screen is not comprehensive, but these are some of the things that in the event of an emergency, you may want to have in your emergency kit. So a 3-day supply of food and water, right? And so this is if in the event that you may have to shelter in place in your business, that something has occurred and the employees on site, they may have to shelter in place. Having that 3-day supply of food and water will help them as they have to shelter in place. And I know in terms of warm blanket and sleeping bags, we may not think that in Arizona we need those things. But again, in the event of, depending on what time of the year this emergency happens, very well may need the warm blanket and the sleeping bag, because if they have to shelter in place, these are things that they will need. When we talk about feminine supplies, personal hygiene items, and hand sanitizer, those are things, paper and pencil if they have to write down, or if in the event that they don't have access to a contact list, right? They may need to jot down some names and numbers of the individuals that are on site. Flashlight and batteries. Those are very important items to have on hand. We talk about the hand crank battery operated radio. And yes, those do exist. And they are a tool, and if in the event that you lose power, so you don't have cell towers, go down, right? You don't have access to a phone. And then as you can see, the first aid kit is also a part of the emergency kit. And then dust masks. So these are just some of the things that we put to start off with a basic emergency kit. And then the last component of a plan that we want to talk about today is an evacuation plan. So in an evacuation plan, as you think about whether an emergency happens that you may have to shelter your employees in place or they have to evacuate, you want to have in your plan the scenario for both. You want to accommodate that for both. Will your business, and think about, an emergency can happen while your business is in operation. Okay, and if it does happen and whether it's your employees and customers may be in your place of business and have to be evacuated, do you have an evacuation plan? And when you start to think about developing your evacuation plan, think about your business, the surroundings of your business, the number of exits, the number of windows that can be utilized as an emergency exit. Once everyone evacuates, where will they assemble so that they can be accounted for, and who will take that count of everyone that was in there? And if you have persons with access and functional needs and those with disabilities, who will aid them in the event of an evacuation? And so these are things that we want you to think about as you begin to develop an evacuation plan, and think about what's the closest exit. So if your place of business and you have an area where most of your customers come in and they are, in the event of an emergency, what's the closest exit for them to evacuate? And if in the event they have to shelter in place, what is the best location in your place of business to have your shelter in place. And so as you begin to think about those things, and I know that it can be overwhelming. And again, we are here to assist you, and just start jotting down some things as you look around and start jotting them down. And as you start jotting them down, then you'll see that there are things that you see that you maybe didn't see before this workshop. And that you know, okay, this is a great window that we can use, and just kind of start to jot them down. And then eventually you may want to, design a little map, not anything fancy, but something that can tell your employees and your customers where they can go if they have to shelter in place, or the nearest exit for them in the event that they have to evacuate. And so as we again wrap up in terms of the developing a plan, you will also see in your situation manual, to help you get started in terms of jotting things down. In the manual, there is an appendix, and we will also send this to Local First with just this document, but you'll see that there's a business emergency plan in the back of the appendix to help you get started. And so we'll send a Word version of this that they can send out to you, but kind of start thinking as you start to put all these things together in terms of development. How do I determine what hazards are to my business and any threats, and identifying the risks? And now how do I put all that together to start to develop a plan that I can have in place for my business, that my employees know about, right? Tell them the plan, have them read the plan so they can familiarize themselves, and it makes them feel more comfortable as well. So as you continue to do that and jot those things down, we want you to just continue to build upon your plan. And you don't have to feel like you have to do all of these things at once, but you will build upon it. And so with that, as we gave you put a lot of information out there, are there any questions? I know, again, it's a lot, but do you have any initial, something we need to clarify? Something you may think is a hazard and you're questioning if it is? Are there any questions that we can answer for you today? If after you leave this workshop, you do have some questions, jot them down. And I'm sure Thomas will send them to us and we can get you answers to those questions. And like I said, our contact information is in the situation manual. And so you can feel free to also, if you come up with questions after you leave this workshop, you can reach out to us. And so with that, again, we would like to thank you for attending today's workshop. We hope that you got some information that will be helpful to you as you continue to plan, even in this pandemic. That is an emergency. Continue to plan and better prepare your business, because the goal is for us to be resilient. And what we do know is small businesses are the vibrancy of any community. And so it is very important that as small businesses, we are prepared. And so with that, I want to thank you again, and I will turn it back over to Thomas.
Great. Thank you so much for all the information today. Super beneficial and useful. Just as to kind of ask a follow-up question for either Brent or Kim, you brought up a lot of scenarios that we tend to not think about being in Arizona, right? Supplies that you might need. Depending on what area of the state that you're in, you might be thinking about this more or less. But obviously with the power outages and that kind of stuff, that's definitely something that's going to impact businesses. Is there anything unique that you've seen businesses, whether it's a brick and mortar or maybe a business that has unique needs that you've seen over the years? Any other examples of things that businesses might consider that aren't things that we typically think about from a day-to-day perspective?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and take that one. Not anything that's unique, and I'm not a small business owner like Kim is, but I grew up in a small business and chose public service over the business atmosphere. But one of the biggest things that I've seen with small businesses, particularly when it comes to disaster, is having partnerships, having kind of developing those coalitions that the businesses can rely on each other to help out as well. And yes, we do have things, during monsoon season, we have a lot of power outages. And I spent a couple of years as an emergency manager for one of the power companies down in the Phoenix area, and learned a lot about the power outages and how they're resolved. And what happens is a lot of times the winds blow and the lines slap together and they kind of trip the breaker, so to speak, kind of like in your house. And they check and make sure nothing's damaged and turn it back on. But in the meantime, your homes are without power, your business is without power. And a lot of times businesses, I grew up in a gas station, one of the old time gas stations when the power went out, we didn't pump gas. And that was a difficulty, especially if it went on for a long time. A lot of talk has been made about adding generators to businesses. That's kind of a slippery slope because that's an expensive thing. And a lot of times power outages don't last that long around here for the most part. The power companies do a pretty good job of maintaining the system and getting them back up. But other things happen that having those coalitions, having those partnerships with the businesses, I know competition is a big deal, but a lot of times having those partnerships with the businesses really helps.
That's great advice. And it's usually us saying that, get connected to your community, get connected to other businesses. That's why Local First is here. And so if you're not tapped in yet, if you're not, getting to know your neighboring businesses, that's the number one thing that's going to help your business in a crisis, because you're going to find out about different resources. You're going to find out about potential grant opportunities or whatever it is. And so you need to stay tapped in. One of the things that I'll just add on is, one of the things that we saw at Local First Arizona as the pandemic came was a lot of businesses not being in a financial situation, both from a savings perspective, but also from just having your finances in order perspective to be able to apply for federal dollars that were made available for small businesses. So, making sure that you have a clean organization of your files of how you've reported your income for your business so that you can apply for grants, making sure that you're aware of any deadlines and things like that, because the faster you can pull that together, the faster you might be able to access some grants to help your business if it is in a crisis, if there's any made available. Being that I'm bringing that up, want to thank the City of Phoenix for running their Phoenix Biz Grants program right now. Local First is assisting with that. So if you're a business attending today and interested in applying, those grants are still available right now through April 15th. So we encourage you to reach out to apply. And just want to thank Kim, want to thank Brent for being here today, sharing this really helpful information for our business community. If anybody would like to get in touch with them after today, we'll make sure to do that for you, and we'll share all of the slides and the information from today. So I want to thank everybody for joining and being a part of this today. Kim and Brent, thank you for your time, and we'll go ahead and close things from here. So thank you everyone very much, and hope you have a great week.
Yes, thank you all.